You are about to listen to an exclusive conversation that I had with Tina Freese Decker. She is the president and CEO of Corewell Health, which is a health product company with over 60,000 team members. This conversation was one of the over 100 conversations that I had in doing research for my brand new book, Leading with Vulnerability, which is officially out October 3rd and is now available for pre-order by going to leadwithvulnerability.com. And I really do hope you get a chance to pre-order a copy for yourself and your team. The whole premise of the book is looking at how can leaders approach vulnerability in the right way so that they can lead through change, unlock the potential of others, drive business performance, and create trust. Because the truth is that vulnerability for leaders, it's just not the same as it is for everybody else. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Tina. You will actually be getting access to the first half of this discussion now. And to get access to the second half, you have to head over to greatleadership.substack.com. Again, that's greatleadership.substack.com. And now let's get right into this discussion with Tina. When you hear the phrase vulnerable leader, what pops into mind for you? What do you think of?
I think of a leader that knows who they are. I think of a leader who is authentic, who is probably quite effective and engaged, especially as a listener, and somebody that's willing to care for others and to be cared for.
I like that simple definition. Yeah, authentic has come up quite a bit through a lot of the conversations that I've been having. So I guess with that definition in mind, can you think of a time during your career when you have had to be vulnerable with your team, your peers? And it could be early on, it could be now. I mean, any point.
Oh, I'm sure there's many times that I've had to be vulnerable and probably lean into more of my humanity. Yeah, I'm quite grateful that I'm in a position where I'm not too worried about being vulnerable. And I think I have a good balance of some of that confidence and calm and what we need for authenticity. There's probably many examples of communicating with our teams and our communities in the earliest days of the pandemic, where we had to acknowledge the uncertainty of that we just didn't know that much about the virus and what we would know and what we would do. You know, there's the acknowledging the profound hurt and exhaustion many of us were feeling in the wake of George Floyd's death. Yeah. But maybe there's a couple examples that I can say that I think come up. I think sometimes being vulnerable is most visible when you have to take a position on sometimes potentially controversial issues. Mm-hmm. And I'm particularly passionate about eliminating health inequities, as I should be in a healthcare organization. And in some cases, that means we need to address the institutional racism within our organizations and in our society. So in that manner, I think vulnerability is a mixture of courage and commitment to a greater good. I think another example of vulnerability is when we talked about the vaccine. We decided to require the COVID-19 vaccine for our healthcare organization. And this was prior to the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare making a requirement for all of healthcare organizations. Mm-hmm. And the vulnerable piece about it is that I actually talked about it in a town hall and said I was considering it, but had not made the decision. So put it out there. And immediately we received letters from team members and community members talking about, their views of the vaccine. Yeah. And we took the time to listen and to read those views. And then we took some of those into consideration when we made the final decision regarding what we would do for the vaccine. So I think that there's examples where vulnerability is visible, and there's examples where it may not be as visible.
Yeah, I forgot to ask, actually, how many employees do you guys have?
We have around 64,000 team members.
Wow, that's amazing. So yeah, it's a huge company. So that's a good example of going in front of everybody and basically saying, hey, I'm considering making the vaccine mandatory, maybe not, and it's kind of putting yourself out there a little bit. What about when you first became CEO? Like, do you remember when you found out that you were first becoming CEO and how you were feeling at that point? Did you have any feelings of vulnerability around there of like, maybe I don't know what I'm doing, or maybe I need help, or were you just confident and ready to go the whole time?
Well, even taking a step back, applying for the current role took courage and vulnerability because I had to put myself out to the community that I was vying for the position. And I also had to reframe my leadership capabilities to meet the needs of the future. So I had to be very open about what I was doing as an internal candidate. That's challenging. And I asked the board to consider me as an external candidate throughout the process. After I got the role, I'm a curious person. I'm not afraid to ask questions, and I'm not afraid to say I don't know. And so that was my typical process. And even as a CEO, you have to model that behavior because there's so many people that know it far better than I do what's going on. And so I did a lot of listening sessions. I did listening surveys, got a lot of input to create our mission, vision, and values in those first 3 months. And that was really helpful to best understand the organization from the role of the CEO versus my previous role.
And then, do you remember like where you were when you found out that you actually got the role? Like, were you just at home and you got a phone call? It was like, hey, by the way.
Yeah, I was out to dinner with a big group of people and got the phone call, and it took probably 20 minutes to talk through it. And then I had to return to that big group of people and not say a word. And so that was really challenging to not share this wonderful news that I was so excited about, but to keep it under wraps for a little bit.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. I bet that was probably a very good dinner after that.
It was.
All right. Any other situations or stories of vulnerability? And the reason I keep asking for stories is, a lot of times when we read a business books can be super boring and dry. So I find that one of the things that a lot of people love the most is like stories of when, these big CEOs had moments of vulnerability when they had to put themselves out there and be emotional. And when people read those stories, it gives them the confidence and reassurance knowing that they can be vulnerable at work too. So any other stories or situations come up when you had to, I don't know, ask for help, admit you made a mistake, show emotion, anything like that?
Well, like I said, there's countless ones, and I think it happens every single day. We just held listening sessions throughout our organization, and it's really hard just to sit back and listen. But I did for the full hour of 3 listening sessions to understand what our team members were going through because there was a significant event in our community. And I also then responded at the very end and showed my emotion and appreciated what people had to say. And reflected on the challenges that people were going through because there's different views of what happened and how we can come together, and how my focus and my role is how we're caring for our team members and making sure that they are in a safe place to open up and to come to work and talk about that. So I think showing the vulnerability is just present in everything. One example, if you're looking for one, is when I took a decision to a board and the board voted on it. We moved forward. But then later I had new information, and I actually took it back to the board and asked them to rethink the decision that they already made. And I did that in the first 3 months of being the CEO. And that was challenging to do because you don't want to rethink every decision. You don't want to take that back to the board.
Yeah.
But I think it was the right decision, and I did it in a way that made sure that we were moving forward and didn't feel like we were going backwards.
Are you able to share, is it like confidential what it was about, or are you able to share like what the context behind it is?
It was a decision about where we were going to locate a building. And
okay.
And it was a big significant issue for our community. And we needed to make sure that we were doing things with affordability in mind and keeping things low cost. And so the new information was I found a couple ways to get the building in a different location for a lower cost or for the same amount of cost that would better serve the community.
Got it. And was that a vulnerable moment to kind of go back to the board and be like, hey, I need you to like rethink something that I suggested? I mean, how did that feel when you have to do that?
Well, you are worried because you are concerned that maybe people will think that you're indecisive.
Yeah.
And that would be my concern. But I think that the whole point of it is there's new information. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. And here's how we're able to be innovative in trying to figure out a way to solve it, to create win-win solutions. And I think when you put it in the perspective of how do you create those win-win solutions, what is your purpose, what is your overall goal, then you frame it in there. It's not about whether you were right or wrong. It's about how are you trying to accomplish the goals and help the organization move in that direction.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned something about confidence earlier, and that you're confident in the stuff that you do. Where does confidence come from? Is it something that you had to work on? Is it just natural for you?
Well, I do believe that you need confidence to be vulnerable and to be authentic. I think you have to be okay with being your real self. And when you're comfortable with being yourself, then that confidence comes, and then the authenticity and the vulnerability come naturally. So I think confidence is something you have to build every single day. It depends on what you're doing, what you're working on, and having that experiences or some examples to kind of lean on helps you build that confidence.
So it seems like it's kind of like a muscle that you need to keep practicing. And
Yeah.
I mean, is there a way, like if somebody said, "Hey, Tina, I want to be more confident like you. How do I practice that? What do I do?" It's one of those like hard things to like tell people how to become more confident. I find that it's very challenging.
Well, so I think that one of the clear things is you have to know who you are. You have to know your values. You have to know what you stand for. You have to know your why and your purpose.
Hmm.
I think that's really, really important to understand that about yourself, because if you don't, then you're floating around, and then what are you going to be confident for? So if you have a good understanding of what you want to accomplish, I think that helps. And then I think you have to understand your brand, what defines you, how do your actions communicate your purpose and your values and the things that are driven from there. And so if you have a good handle on both who you are and your brand, and how you live your values, then I think that really helps you be confident and be vulnerable. The best leaders I know are comfortable being themselves, and they are authentic, and they are genuine. And I think they also then create that followership from that.
Well, it's funny. It's like easy to say be authentic, but I find a lot of and I don't know, you can tell me in your experience. Personally, I find that a lot of leaders sometimes struggle to be authentic and genuine because they want to have this, work persona and the home persona, and oftentimes they don't want those two different personas to meet. The leader always has to know all the answers, doesn't want to show any weakness, but then you show up at home to your spouse or your significant other, and you're a completely different person. So, have you noticed that? Like, is it hard for leaders to be authentic and genuine?
I'm sure it's hard to be authentic and genuine. But I think if you put the purpose first, what are you trying to accomplish? And so for us, it's the mission every single day. There is no way I know everything to get us to that mission. And there are a bunch of other smart people that can help us navigate to get there. And my job is to reach out and say, how can you help us get there? And I need you to help us to get there. Because I won't be able to do it all. So I do think it comes back to how do you work as a team? How do you collaborate? How do you engage with people? How do you develop others to really buy into what you're trying to accomplish? And if you have that purpose and you rally around what that is, then it's not about you or the other person. It's about how do you collectively get there.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. When you think about like earlier on in your career, would you say that leadership has changed? In other words, when you first entered the workforce, did you feel that you could be vulnerable and open and genuine and transparent? Or is this like a relatively new thing for leaders over the past few years?
I think it's evolved. I think with our society, it's evolved that you can be more of your real self. I think that it depends on the organization and the leadership about what is rewarded, what is expected. And so I really try hard to make sure people know that I want to see them and not something different, and that it's okay to make some small mistakes as long as we learn from them and we're able to move forward.
Okay. One of my favorite questions to always ask CEOs is around mistakes and failures. Um, so when you look back at your career, what do you think was the biggest mistake or failure you ever made?
I don't know if this is the biggest mistake, but one of them is um, making sure that you can match the um, the tone and the approach with the people that you're trying to work with and the partnership. And so I think it's really important that that when you're working on a partnership opportunity, that you do it the way you think will connect to get a win-win solution. And so there was an example where we went down the path of doing it, the probably traditional way, the approach that every other example would work, but it seemed to deteriorate the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I stepped back a few weeks ago and said, I think we need to change that, and instead put out, just hey, here's what I think we should do. Do you agree with this? Let's, solidify it via email. And their response was, that's fantastic. We want to do it that way. And it just solved some of the issues, and it actually elevated the partnership to a better place because I think we brought more humanity into it instead of doing it more the logical way.
Yeah.
And so I think some of those mistakes, they're not huge, but they're little things that can either drive a relationship or partnership apart or could further move it together. And they're all different. And so you have to really navigate which ones make the most sense.
How much of vulnerability do you think is sharing like the personal side of you? So do you share, for example, your personal struggles, your challenges, anything about your family or your hobbies with your peers and coworkers?
Yeah, I do share. I try to make sure I balance it so it's not always about me, but it's something that contributes to the conversation, to where we need to go. I don't mind sharing about what's going on in my life and my family if it helps us advance forward with what we're trying to accomplish. Because I think that's a key piece of it.
Yeah. So it's not sharing for the sake of sharing, it's sharing with the idea. So in other words, understanding why it is that you're sharing, like having that purpose behind, like, why am I talking about my family? Why am I sharing this personal story? It's not just to share it, but to have some sort of reasoning behind it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, great. And then how much of boundaries do you think plays a role? Like, can you be too vulnerable at work?
Well, I do think that you need to have boundaries. I think it's really important that you set things up to ensure that there's psychological safety, that you have respect and trust and dignity.
Yeah.
I think those are really important to maintain. And then I think those define your integrity and your values. So I do think having those boundaries up, but they may differ based on the relationship that you have with people, but it's important to have that.
Okay, so the boundaries are important. It sounds like what you're saying is you can be too vulnerable.
I think you have to make sure it's applied to what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Can you think of a time when somebody was vulnerable with you and what happened or what the impact might have been on you or on them? I hope you enjoyed this discussion with Tina. Remember, if you want to get access to the second part of this discussion, which is just as fascinating as the first part, head over to greatleadership.substack.com. You can join a thriving community over there. Again, it's greatleadership.substack.com. That's where we are going to be posting and sharing the second portion of all of these conversations. And there's a lot of them with some really amazing and fascinating CEOs. All the conversations are completely candid. They were unscripted, and I found them to be particularly fascinating. So again, greatleadership.substack.com. And if you want to pre-order a copy of the book and get access to some really cool bonuses, including an exclusive webinar that I'm going to be hosting, head over to leadwithvulnerability.com and pre-order your copy there. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.